Amina adjusted her hijab, ensuring not a single strand of hair peeked through. The grand house before her, with its towering glass windows and pristine white walls, had once felt intimidating. Now, after nearly a year of working as a nanny for Omar and Layla, it felt familiar, though never quite like home. She inhaled deeply before stepping inside, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the crisp morning air. Layla's voice, sharp yet hurried, echoed from the living room. "Sophia, come here. You're going to be late for school." The little girl giggled somewhere down the hallway, her small feet pattering against the marble floors. Amina smiled. Sophia was a bright child, full of life and mischief, and Amina had grown to love her in a way that sometimes made her chest tighten. "Good morning," Amina greeted, entering the living room. Layla barely glanced up from her laptop. "Morning. Breakfast is on the table. Can you make sure Sophia eats? I have a meeting in 20 minutes. "Yes, of course." Amina wasn't surprised. Layla was always busy. Her high-powered job kept her occupied, and her presence in the house often felt like a passing shadow. Just then Omar descended the stairs. His presence was different, subtle but commanding. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly combed, but there was an ease in his posture, a quiet kind of weariness. He loosened his tie slightly as he walked into the kitchen, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Morning," he said, his voice low and smooth. Amina nodded politely. "Good morning, sir." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't have to call me that, Amina. Just Omar is fine." She hesitated, felt improper, but she nodded. "Okay." Sophia ran in, throwing her arms around Amina's waist. "I don't want to eat. Can we just go play?" Amina knelt down, smoothing Sophia's curls. "You have to eat first. Then we can play. Promise. Promise." As she guided Sophia to the table, she felt Omar's gaze linger on her for a moment longer than necessary. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but Amina noticed. She always did. A growing distance, a new closeness. By the time Layla left, the house felt quieter. Amina busied herself cleaning up, listening to Sophia chatter away about her favorite cartoons. Omar sat across from them, flipping through a newspaper, though his focus seemed elsewhere. "Long day ahead?" Amina asked carefully. He exhaled, setting the paper down. "Always." Was. Silence settled between them, heavy yet strangely unthreatening. Amina had never spoken much to Omar beyond pleasantries, but lately there had been these moments, these unspoken conversations where words felt unnecessary. She turned back to Sophia, brushing crumbs off her cheek. "All right, little one. Let's get you ready for school." Sophia pouted but complied, allowing Amina to lead her upstairs. As they climbed the steps, Amina could still feel Omar's presence behind her, as if he were watching, though when she glanced back, he was already looking away. That evening, after Sophia had been tucked into bed, Amina stepped onto the back terrace for a moment of peace. The cool night air wrapped around her, the scent of jasmine thick in the garden. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a rare moment of stillness. "You like the garden?" She startled slightly, turning to find Omar leaning against the doorway. He had loosened his tie completely now, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked different at night, less like the composed businessman, more like a man trying to escape his own thoughts. "It's peaceful," Amina admitted. "It reminds me of home." "Where is home for you?" She hesitated. "Not far from here. But different." Omar nodded as if he understood. "I imagine it's hard living away from your family." Amina glanced down. "It is. But work is work." Beat of silence. Then his voice, softer now, almost contemplative. "Do you ever think about leaving? Starting something else?" Amina frowned slightly. "I have a fiancé," she said, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to say it. Omar didn't react immediately. His eyes remained on her, thoughtful. "I see." Another silence stretched between them, one she should have broken but she didn't. She should have excused herself, walked away. put distance where it was needed. But she stayed. And Omar didn't leave either. The beginning of something dangerous. Later that night, as Amina lay in bed, she thought about the way Omar had looked at her. It wasn't obvious, not in the way men sometimes stared. It was something subtler, something careful and restrained, but there nonetheless. She clutched the edge of her blanket, forcing herself to push the thoughts away. This was her job, nothing more. But deep down, in the quietest part of her heart, she knew something had already begun. Amina moved through the house with practiced ease, her hands steady as she folded Sophia's tiny clothes and placed them into drawers. The late afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting golden patterns across the polished wood floors. It should have been an ordinary day, no different from the ones before it. And yet everything felt different now. It had been 3 nights since the conversation in the garden. 3 nights since Omar had lingered just a little too long, since she had let silence speak for her when she should have walked away. She told herself it meant nothing, that whatever had passed between them was a trick of the evening air, an illusion spun from exhaustion and loneliness. But the awareness had taken root, spreading like ivy through her thoughts. A sound behind her. Footsteps, measured and deliberate. She turned, already knowing who it was. Omar stood in the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled up, hands tucked casually into his pockets. His presence was always commanding, but now it carried something else, something that made the space between them feel smaller than it was. "You don't have to do that," he said, nodding toward the neatly stacked clothes. "We have housekeepers for this." Amina forced a polite smile. "It's part of my job." Omar leaned against the doorframe, watching her with an unreadable expression. "You always take your work so seriously." She didn't know how to respond to that. Was it a compliment, a simple observation, or something more? Sophia's laughter rang from the other room, breaking the moment. Amina took the opportunity to step around him, moving toward the hallway. But as she did, his voice stopped her. "Amina." She hesitated. "Yes, was." Breath. Then, almost too softly, "Never mind." She nodded and walked away. An unwanted invitation. That evening, Layla returned home earlier than usual. Dressed in a sleek black dress, she moved through the house with effortless elegance, adjusting her earrings as she spoke. "Omar and I are going to a charity gala tonight," she announced, barely looking up from her phone. "I'll need you to watch Sophia a little later than usual." "Of course," Amina replied. Layla sighed. "Honestly, I wish I could skip these things. But networking is everything in my business." From across the room, Omar's voice was dry. "Yes, Layla, we all know how much you hate socializing." She shot him a look. "Not the point, Omar." Amina focused on adjusting Sophia's shoes, trying not to listen. She had grown used to their sharp exchanges, the way they danced around each other like strangers forced to share the same space. Layla exhaled, returning her attention to Amina. "Actually, why don't you come?" Amina blinked. "Come where?" "To the gala," Layla said with a wave of her hand. "You never go out." "It'll be good for you." Amina hesitated. "I appreciate it, but I have nothing to wear to something like that." Layla smirked. "Easily fixed. I have a dozen dresses that would fit you." Omar, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "She said no, Layla." Layla arched a brow. "I was just being nice." "Then respect her choice." The air in the room shifted. Amina felt it, even if she couldn't name it. Layla, ever perceptive, narrowed her eyes slightly before shrugging. "Suit yourself," she said, grabbing her clutch. "We'll be back late." Moments later they were gone, leaving behind only silence. Something that shouldn't be there. After putting Sophia to sleep, Amina settled onto the couch with a book. The house felt too still, too large without Layla's constant movement or Sophia's laughter to fill the space. She tried to read, but her mind refused to settle. Then a sound. She turned her head just as Omar stepped into the living room. He had changed from his suit into something more relaxed. Dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, the top buttons undone. I thought you went out, Amina said, her voice quiet. You did. And then I left. She frowned. Won't Layla? She won't notice, he interrupted. His tone wasn't bitter, but there was something in it that made Amina look away. Omar moved to the bar cart, pouring himself a glass of water. The sound of ice clinking against the glass was the only noise in the room. You never take breaks, he observed. Amina forced a small smile. I don't need them. Omar took a slow sip of water, watching her over the rim of the glass. That's a lie. Amina exhaled. Why are you here, Omar? His gaze didn't waver. I could ask you the same thing. She felt her heart pound, too fast, too loud. She needed to end this conversation, to leave before the walls of propriety crumbled completely. But she didn't move. And neither did he. The air between them grew charged, thick with everything unsaid. Then, as if sensing the danger, Amina finally stood. I should check on Sophia. Omar didn't stop her. But as she walked past him, his voice came softly. Good night, Amina. She didn't turn around. Good night. But as she climbed the stairs, her fingers trembled. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to walk away. Amina awoke before dawn, the house still steeped in silence. For a moment, she allowed herself the comfort of the quiet, the illusion that nothing had changed. But the unease in her chest reminded her otherwise. The memory of last night, of Omar's presence, his words, the weight of his gaze, lingered like a scent that refused to fade. She had felt the shift between them, subtle yet undeniable. It was a dangerous thing, this unspoken understanding. With a steadying breath, she rose from bed, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders before heading to the kitchen. A morning of uncertainty. The sky outside was still ink-dark as she brewed tea, the soft hum of the kettle the only sound. She needed this moment, this routine, to remind herself of who she was, of what was right. A step. She knew before turning who it was. Omar stood in the doorway, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His hair slightly tousled as though he hadn't slept. You're up early, he murmured. So are you, she replied, keeping her hands busy as she poured the tea. He leaned against the counter, watching her. Couldn't sleep. She didn't respond. Silence had become their second language, speaking in the things they chose not to say. Tea, she offered, finally breaking the tension. Omar hesitated, then nodded. Please. She handed him a cup, careful not to let their fingers brush. For a while they stood like that, two people in a quiet kitchen, pretending there was nothing lingering between them. Then Omar exhaled. I feel like I should apologize. Amina tensed. For what? For he paused, searching for the right words. For making things complicated. She swallowed. Things aren't complicated. You're my employer, and I'm here to take care of Sophia. Omar studied her for a long moment. Is that really all it is? Her grip tightened around the cup. It has to be. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Something close to regret. You're right, he finally said. It has to be. Amina nodded, as if saying it aloud could make it true. The unwelcome visitor. Later that afternoon, as Amina helped Sophia color at the dining table, the doorbell rang. Expecting the housekeeper, she wiped her hands on her apron and moved to open it. But it wasn't the housekeeper. It was Tariq. Her breath hitched. Dressed in a simple button-up and slacks. His familiar face held warmth, but also quiet expectation. Amina, he greeted. His voice filled with restrained affection. I wanted to surprise you. For a moment, she couldn't find her voice. Tariq's presence was a sharp reminder of a world she had been drifting from. Sophia, sweetheart, stay here, she said gently before stepping outside and closing the door behind her. Tariq frowned slightly. You don't look happy to see me. No, I am, she said quickly, forcing a smile. I just wasn't expecting you. He searched her face. You've been distant lately. Amina swallowed. It's just work. I'm busy. Tariq reached for her hand, his touch gentle, grounding. I worry about you here in this house. Are you happy, Amina? The question sent a pang through her chest. She should have said yes. She should have reassured him. Instead, she hesitated. The silence stretched too long. Tariq's expression shifted, something uncertain creeping into his features. Is there something you're not telling me? Amina forced a breath. Oh, nothing. The lie tasted bitter. A storm brewing. That night, as the rain drummed softly against the windows, Amina sat curled up in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Tariq's words haunted her. Are you happy, Amina? She didn't know anymore. Her world had been simple once, clear, defined. She had always known her place, her path. But Omar had changed that. A soft knock at the door made her stiffen. Not Sophia. The child was fast asleep. Slowly, she rose, hesitating before opening it. Omar stood there, his expression unreadable. I need to talk to you, he said. Her pulse quickened. Omar, this isn't. Just for a moment. Amina hesitated before stepping aside, letting him in. As the door clicked shut behind him, she knew. Whatever was about to happen, they were already too far gone to turn back.